bottom line is this is projected to be clearly the worst team in the NFC East. I think the question is, like, what is the floor?
That just doesn't feel like quite enough juice for the squeeze. The number ought to be much better than this.
But what is the upside for this Cowboys team? Are they in a separate tier for you? Would it shock you if this team pushed for a division title?
Because it can get ugly really, really fast. I think by the time you get to that bye week in week 14, they're going to be waving the white flag.
We'll go team by team here, Brandon. Get your thoughts on the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Commanders, even the New York Giants, as far as their outlook goes this season. But I want to start at the top. We certainly expect the Philadelphia Eagles, at least on paper, to be the best team in this division. Is there a concern for you at all on this roster? Because I look at the Eagles similarly to a team like the Bills or the Ravens in the AFC, where you say, man, it's just, barring the obvious, an injury at the quarterback position, an injury to Saquon Barkley, it's really tough to envision this team taking a step back. And yet, we see it every year, right? These teams that we expect to go out and win 12, 13 games, something could go wrong. Obviously, everything broke right for the Eagles a year ago. But is there a position group? Is there any overall concern for you with this Eagles team where you could say, okay, that's a bit of a hole on this roster?
Well, they were healthy last year. I think I worry about injury regression possibly catching up with them. That could be something to fear because the teams that make it to the end are typically the healthiest, and Philadelphia was that. But this team is losing a lot on defense. 4,070 combined snaps on defense between the guys like Josh Sweat, now with Arizona. I'm really high on the Cardinals this year. Darius Slay, Brandon Graham, those guys moving on. However, they did a really good job, as Howie Roseman always does, of replacing that talent. I love Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. He was one of the best linebackers in the draft. They had Azeez Ojulari, and this is not a team that's going to lack talent. So there's turnover. If there's reason to be concerned, it's because they're losing so much defensively. But this was also one of the deepest teams in the league last year. So you get some backups that become starters. You've got free agents. You've got draft picks. I think they're going to be just fine. And then one of the biggest reasons to feel confident about the Eagles being able to do something similar to what they did last year, making a run to the Super Bowl and then inevitably winning it. Jalen Carter is entering year 3 of his career. He's already one of the most unstoppable forces on the defensive line, and he's just now entering his prime years. So there's some reason to be concerned, but I'm more optimistic than anything that the Eagles might even be better than they were a year ago.
Do you have any interest in Jalen Hurts in the MVP market at 17-1? I think he ended up in some ways kind of splitting the vote with Saquon Barkley last year. And we know at this point, a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end, a defensive player, they're not winning MVP. It's a quarterback award. I think that was hammered home yet again last season. But is there a case for Jalen Hurts at that number?
I don't think there is. I just think there's too many mouths to feed in that offense, too much credit that goes the way of the wide receivers, the offensive line, and then of course Saquon Barkley. This is a running team at the end of the day, and they're going to salt the clock away when they have leads at the end of games. I don't think that plays well to Jalen Hurts winning MVP. You have to have a couple of those miraculous comeback efforts and things like that. That's just not the way the Philadelphia Eagles play. There's too many other good options on the board for me to dump any money into Jalen Hurts.
All right, one more quick one on the Eagles, Brandon. Any concerns for you when it comes to Saquon Barkley in fantasy? We just laid out why the Eagles should be able to pick up where they left off last season. They're favored to win the division. They're favored to win the NFC. But we saw an extreme workload for Saquon Barkley last year. The pass catching is kind of dried up relative to earlier in his career, especially if you're playing in a full PPR league. Is there any logic behind fading someone like Saquon Barkley coming off of what felt like the best case scenario season?
So full disclosure, I still have Saquon Barkley as my RB1, but I totally understand the case against him. He has hit that touch threshold. Running backs that surpass 2,000 yards typically drop off by at least 500 the very next year. The one reason why I'm not diving fully into Saquon paranoia is when you look at some of the running backs in previous history. I'm not going all the way back to O.J. Simpson to rely on that data for looking at how Saquon Barkley can be. A guy like Jamal Lewis, Chris Johnson, these guys were not in situations that Saquon Barkley is in. He is in his physical prime still, and he's running behind the best offensive line in an ecosystem that's just absolutely perfect for him. If you go back and look at the prior 2,000-yard rushers, that was not the case for those guys. So I don't want to get too far away or too paranoid about drafting Saquon Barkley. Still RB1 for me, even if it's hanging on by a thread.
Let's move on to the Washington Commanders, Brandon. Plenty of additions on both sides of the ball. They bring in Laramie Tunsil, Deebo Samuel, Javon Kinlaw, bolstering that defensive line, Jonathan Jones at cornerback. We even got a new kicker this year in Matt Gay, but some notable departures as well. I would say most notably Jonathan Allen, who Javon Kinlaw will step in for on that defensive line. Commanders plus 205 right now to win the NFC East. This is a team, Brandon, that I could kind of see going in either direction. Would it shock me if they pick up where they left off? They're pushing the Eagles for that division title. No, it wouldn't. I could also see a world in which, again, a lot of things broke right for the Commanders last season. And maybe that comes back around a bit in year two for Jayden Daniels. But would you consider a play on the Commanders at plus 205 to take the NFC East?
I would definitely consider it. We've had a different champion each of the last 20 years, so I think you have to at least consider that. For me, the best bet on the board for the Commanders, though, is a little bit of a juicier one. How about Jayden Daniels at plus 750 to win the MVP? If the Commanders go on and win the NFC East, he's going to be right there in that conversation. And last time I checked, 7-1 is better than 2-1. So I think Jayden Daniels to win MVP is a good way to look here if you are confident in the Commanders. The biggest thing that they need to overcome is expectations. Last year, no one expected anything from them, and they made it all the way to the conference title game. That's house money. And we know, as sports bettors, when you're betting with your own money, it's a different world of pressure. That's what they face here. They're going all in to win a championship, adding Von Miller, getting Laramie Tunsil. They trade for Deebo Samuel. These are huge additions with a very specific goal of capitalizing on this window where you have this already elite quarterback in Jayden Daniels on a rookie contract. This team went from one of the easiest schedules last year in the NFL to now one of the toughest, and they're on prime time 5 times. They're in that national window 10 times throughout the course of the year. I think they're good enough to overcome this, but that's what they're up against this year.
Brandon, the Dallas Cowboys win total comes in at 8.5 at the DraftKings Sportsbook. Of course, you can basically pick whatever number you want, but 8.5 plus 120 to the over, minus 145 to the under. There does seem to be renewed optimism with this Cowboys team. Of course, Dak Prescott coming back healthy. You got a new coach in Brian Schottenheimer. They bring in George Pickens, who we did just find out, Brandon, you were out on for fantasy football purposes, but I'm selling myself on CeeDee Lamb as a potential wide receiver one overall. I actually disagree with you on George Pickens. I like the Lamb-Pickens combination. I think those two are different enough players that they'll complement each other. I think it's the best 1-2 that the Cowboys have had since probably year 2 of CeeDee Lamb's career when they still had Amari Cooper. What is the upside for this Cowboys team? Are they in a separate tier for you, below Philly, below Washington? Would it shock you if this team pushed for a division title?
I have them. We did the list of teams that we think are going to make the playoffs this year that didn't make the playoffs last year. For me, the Dallas Cowboys are on that list. They do have a new head coach. That's going to be the biggest change. I don't know what Brian Schottenheimer brings to the table, so we're all going to learn that on the fly. But talent-wise, this roster is good enough to compete. They were so beat up last year, and it wasn't just Dak. Jake Ferguson dealt with injuries, Brandon Cooks, Zach Martin. That was just on offense. It was even worse defensively for them. This is also a team that went 2-7 last year at home. That's not who the Dallas Cowboys are. This is a really good home team. I think they're going to bounce back, and I'm fading George Pickens at his price. I do think he's a good football player, and you're right. It's the best number 2 that they've had in this version of the Dallas Cowboys. I just think you have to pay for it, and I'm not willing to do that. But in terms of what he can bring to the table to help open things up, let's not also forget they got Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams. This is not a team that could run the football a year ago. They should be better in all areas.
All due respect to Javonte Williams, all due respect to Miles Sanders, Brandon. I don't know if I'm fired up about either of those guys. I think Jayden Blue, the rookie, if I'm taking a Dallas Cowboys running back in a fantasy draft, he's the guy I'm taking an upside play on late. But I think that's all the more reason they're just going to throw and throw and throw this season with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens. All right, we saved the best for last, Brandon. Let's finish out with some New York Giants talk. Win total I would like to say it's 5.5, but that one's minus 155 to the under. If you go down to 4.5, it's minus 170 to the over, plus 140 to the under. So we're kind of splitting the difference there. The bottom line is this is projected to be clearly the worst team in the NFC East. I think the question is what is the floor for this Giants team, Brandon? Because I think unlike a team like New Orleans that I think would be okay, if they're the worst team and they get the number one pick, there's a lot of pressure on this Giants regime right now, whether you're talking about the GM, whether you're talking about Brian Daboll, to try to maximize this thing. I just don't know if they have the pieces, especially offensively, to do that.
That is the difference between them and New Orleans. I don't think New Orleans is really being shy about the fact that they're not interested in winning. I think the Giants want to win. I don't think that they're going to be good enough in order to do that. They somehow landed the toughest strength of schedule in the entire NFL. You ask what the floor is. I think we're looking at 2-15 as a kind of season. Yeah. We could go from Russell Wilson to Jameis Winston to Jackson Dart as the season progresses. It could get ugly really, really fast. I think by the time you get to that bye week in week 14, they're going to be waving the white flag.
Let's take a look at a team prop here for the Eagles. Longest regular season winning streak, over 5.5 games. I will remind you that the Eagles did rip off 10 in a row midway through last season, getting this at plus 160.
I'm going to have to pass this one too. It's really a tough thing to do. And so I feel like I've never bet anything like this. So it makes me a little bit nervous to look and say, I'm essentially parlaying 6 straight wins in a row and I get it at plus 160. That just doesn't feel like quite enough juice for the squeeze. The number ought to be much better than this is what I would think. Last year, as you mentioned, they did win 10 in a row at one point. So it's not like they can't do it, but it's still tough, especially when you consider they are the circle game on everybody's schedule. I could see them getting to 4 or 5, sure, but we need them to get to 6 to cash this bet. I would need at least 2-1 before I could consider this.
Play it or pass it, the Commanders to win the NFC East, plus 205.
I'm going to play it. I'm all in on the Washington Commanders this year. Different division winner every year for the last 20 seasons in the NFC East. That's one reason to just take anybody that's not Philadelphia, but the Commanders are loaded, motivated off of that blowout loss in the conference title game. I'm viewing this as a Jayden Daniels MVP season. That would be my best bet for anything Commanders at plus 750. Got to win the division if he's going to get there. I'm good playing this one. And their schedule, as tough as it still ranks lower than Philadelphia's. Philadelphia coming in with the 4th toughest SOS. The next one will be still for the Dallas Cowboys, going 1-1 against what has become my Washington Commanders. This is at plus 150. And before you answer this, I want to see if I can sell you on playing this. Dallas gets Washington at home in week 7. The Commanders play Monday night the week prior. So a short week on the road for Washington, not advantageous. Then they get Dallas in week 17, the week after they play the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm thinking Dallas ought to get one of these. What say you? 1-1 against the Washington Commanders. Play it or pass it.
Look, for the sake of the game here, I'm going to play this one, even though I don't love the price at plus 150, for what's, somewhat of a specific result. Look, the concern for me, Brandon, might not be the Dallas Cowboys going 0-2 against Washington. It could be Dallas going 2-0 against the Commanders. Either way, one of those outcomes is losing you this bet. But I do think 1-1 is the most likely scenario. If you look back historically, Dallas has only been swept by Washington twice in the last 25 years. It happened in 2020 and it happened in 2012. Other than that, they've taken at least one game against the Commanders in each of those seasons. And, given where the Commanders have been as a franchise during that time, maybe that's not all that impressive, but I think this is pretty reasonable. I don't think these teams are that far apart. We've talked a lot about what kind of offensive progression we could see for the Cowboys with a healthy Dak Prescott. I think we were kind of conditioned to think of the Cowboys differently without Dak last year. And as Jim Coventry laid out for us, this is a totally different team with a healthy Dak. And like you said, they're catching Washington at a pretty good spot in both of those matchups this season. I'll play this one.
Let's wrap with the New York Football Giants, longest regular season win streak, under 1.5 games at plus 210. Are you willing to play that one? Or are you going to pass it?
Oh, I'm playing it. Man. I am fading the hell out of this Giants team. I don't know where the best 2-game stretch is. Maybe it's week 16 and 17. You get the Vikings and the Raiders. Like there are not two obvious, okay, maybe we could win this game spots on the schedule for the Giants. So give me that one at plus 210.